makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If your antennas are maybe in the back or maybe part of the structures, if something in the back did explode, regardless of the health of the boilers.
Could take out your antenna.
It could, without taking the radio room out. I don't know. I don't think it's good theory, but I just wanted to add that.
So Joe just said something that got me thinking, which is the ship was young enough that the boilers, and I agreed wholeheartedly, and now I'm second guessing that, is the ship was young enough and should have been in good enough condition, and yet it had an engine problem that was significant enough that engine had to be shut down. So that could be, that could show a larger issue in terms of the entire propulsion system. So potentially the boiler could have not actually been in that great of condition.
I guess for me,
I'm inferring the condition of one thing based on another, which is not right.
Well, and I'm more willing to say like an engine that's in the water and sucking a lot of stuff through it is way more likely to have something, accidentally get pulled through it or get damaged and have that be an external damage that happened to it that was unfortunate, but that happens sometimes, versus the boiler just being crappy and exploding. You're not getting external stuff. Like if you accidentally, as macabre as it is, suck a dolphin through your engine.
I think they have filters.
I think they do too, right? But if you, that obviously that's an exaggeration.
Large
I'm sorry.
piece of marine
but
life.
if you, or anything, you pull anything through it, even a tin can.
But not a dolphin. Please, not a dolphin.
Oh my goodness. Do we just go back and re-record that? I'm sorry. I'm sorry I said a dolphin.
You have just set PETA against
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of upset people
I know,
out there.
but so if you pull anything, the filter for some reason is failing, or even if it's just a tiny little thing, a tiny little rock even, pulled through something like that is enough to really muck it up.
Yeah.
And
I don't think it'd cause an explosion, probably.
No, I don't think it'd but I'm saying like through an engine that's submerged, that makes more sense to me than, saying, well, it's a problem system-wide.
What I was inferring was the health of one component indicates the health of the entire system, and that is not a correct assumption, but that is just kind of where I went.
It's a possibility. The cylinder head that was cracked, if that indeed was what it was probably made by somebody else other than the boiler maker. Well, anyway, I don't like the boiler explosion theory simply because I still think the crew, even if the radio was out, would have had time to deploy the lifeboats.
I agree with that.
So, yeah, that's why I'm not buying this one.
Yeah.
Or at the very least, debris would have been found.
Yeah, that's for sure.
If the ship exploded,
there would have been something.
There'd be stuff floating around.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
The next theory is that they were torpedoed by a German U-boat.
No.
Which was a very popular theory at the time, but...
there's no supporting evidence. They've gone back and looked.
Yeah, no, after the war, they asked the German government, and the Germans, by the way, are very good at keeping records.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of got
very good.
After the Holocaust, that kind of got them in hot water, actually. But, yeah.
And this is not a joke?
Yeah, no, it's not a joke, but yeah, that certainly was, got a lot of them strung up after the war. But anyway, back to they had no U-boats in the area at the time of the disappearance, they said, and they had no record of sinking the Cyclops. And also, again, when you torpedo a ship, they usually don't just explode and burst into flames. Usually it takes a little while to sink.
Yeah, and somebody on the bridge probably sees that ship coming.
Even if they don't see the shot coming, let's say it's at night, it explodes, and the ship takes a while to go down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should. Unless it just broke the ship in two and it just like...
The perfect shot.
But even then...
but there were no U-boats in the area.
Yeah.
So
there were no U-boats.
None of this makes sense because nobody was there.
Next.
All right, next theory, mutiny. Yeah, no. I know. There was an article in Time magazine just last year, March of last year.
Really?
Yeah, was speculated that the disappearance might have been a, quote, botched mutiny, unquote. They uncovered startling new evidence that Captain Worley was disliked by other officers.
Oh my goodness, what?
And that there had been an
wrong.
attempted mutiny, but actually what they're doing, they're just quoting from that same telegram from David Livingston in Barbados that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go on to explain that the mutiny caused the disappearance by... Well, actually, they don't. But it was a pretty crappy little article. Yeah, it's like they say it might have been a botched mutiny, and they don't explain exactly how So I think we can dismiss this one.
Yeah. Although I do, for entertaining reading, I would recommend that people go look up the records on Worsley. Because it's pretty funny, some of the things that he says. And it's funny because of the time. The language is different. So alcohol for medicinal reasons, but then accusing people of being sex maniacs and stuff. It's really an entertaining read.
Yeah, actually it is. And when he was accused of all this stuff, he made some counter accusations himself. Yeah.
And it's
and who knows who's right? I mean, maybe Worsley has been defamed. I don't know.
Yeah, he could have been.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. All right.
So we got that.
So much for mutiny. Let's move on to our next one, and this was a big one at the time.
Yeah, I would believe that.
Yeah, this is treason. Did I mention earlier that Captain Worley was suspected of having pro-German sympathies?
Well, you had talked about that his name wasn't originally that, but then that was all we gave people.
Yeah, Worley, as far as the Navy knew, had been born in San Francisco, but it turns out that he was born in San Francisco. He jumped ship from a German ship in San Francisco.
Oh.
Yeah, it turns out Worley was actually born Johann Wichmann in Germany, and he jumped ship in San Francisco in 1878 and illegally entered the U.S. And eventually, sometime after that, changed his name, and eventually became like a ship's master or whatever you would call it, and captained a lot of ships and doing, more or less cargo from the Far East to the U.S.
What
West
year
Coast.
did he do that?
Jumping ship?
Yeah.
I believe it was 1878.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, I think as far
he was
as I know,
quite a young man when he did it then.
Well, he was born, I think, I heard in 1862. So at the time of the sinking of the Cyclops, then he would have been in his mid-50s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he would have jumped ship 15, 16?
15, 16. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that happens. Yeah. He turned out to be a German. They found this out after the boat went missing. And one of the passengers who joined at the last minute was Alfred Gottschalk, who was the U.S. Consul General in Brazil at that time, but he supposedly quit his job and said that he wanted to go back to the States and enlist to go fight the Germans. Although other people said that he was very pro-German. And also, it was suspected there were a lot of other German sympathizers in the crew. David Livingstone, again, the Consul General in Barbados, and it sent his telegram to the State Department, said, quote, "Have names of crew but not of all the officers and passengers. Many Germanic names appear, while not having..."
That's our deductive reasoning.
There you go. While not having any definite grounds, I fear fate worse than sinking, unquote. I mean, of course, I talked about his suspicions about the extra stuff that he took on board in Barbados. And in fact, if they did intend to sail across the Atlantic to Germany and turn the Cyclops and its cargo over to the Germans, this would kind of explain the unscheduled stop in Barbados to pick up the extra coal and the extra food and everything.
Yeah.
According to David Livingstone's telegram, the Cyclops took on a ton of meat, a ton of flour, half a ton of vegetables. And so, to him, it looked like Worley was planning an extended cruise.
Like he was stocking up.
Yeah, exactly. And he also took on another 600 tons of coal. So that was Livingstone's suspicion. And also, I read this in an old article in Popular Science that the Navy at some point got, and this was before the end of the war, they got word from an agent in Germany that he had seen the Cyclops in Kiel, Germany.
Oh, really?
So that also fuels suspicions.
Yeah.
And they followed up on that. It turned out to be a German ship that just happened to be named Cyclops. It wasn't our Cyclops.
It wasn't our Cyclops.
Yeah, it wasn't our Cyclops. And there was another rumor that the Navy got a letter from a POW in Germany who said that he had talked to several members of the Cyclops crew in his POW camp in Germany. I'm kind of discounting that one. And so this could have happened. I mean, it maybe, but the reason I don't really buy into this one, even though it was a very popular one at the time, it would seem to me to be very foolhardy to try to cross the Atlantic with only one engine functioning.
I would say more than foolhardy.
Yeah.
That's a very gentle term.
Yeah. And again, there was actually no reason to suspect either Worley's loyalties or Gottschalk's loyalties or all the rest of those Germanic people that were in the crew. I think that the Cyclops would have been in much greater danger if they had sailed across, because they might have run into a U-boat.
Yeah.
And they would have been a juicy target.
They would have had no way. U-boats don't radio over, "Are you a friendly?"
Yeah,
They just shoot.
Yeah.
Well, and
It
also,
works.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the profile of the Cyclops, they have these things called ship profile charts. Like,
Yeah.
And the Germans look and they say, is there anything in the German Navy that looks like that? Nope. Okay, kill them. And that's what they did. Also, the Cyclops had a really distinctive look, and it certainly would have been spotted in whatever port it wound up in, unless the crew...
It would have stood out like a sore thumb.
Oh, hell yeah. And of course, the Germans would have had to kill everybody on the ship who wasn't pro-German, since nobody ever turned up again. The records don't show this, although maybe they would have covered that up. I don't know. It probably is kind of important to point out that the Germans of World War I weren't quite like the Germans of World War II.
No, it's completely different mentality.
Yeah. They I don't think they would have committed mass murder, of civilians.
No, that wasn't on the docket.
So I think we can discount that one. I don't think that's what happened.
I think we need to discount the next one too, but go ahead and tell people.
Oh yeah, well this one has been floated also that there were a German agent or agents on the ship. And they committed sabotage. They basically planted a bomb or numerous bombs.
No.
Yeah.
Steve has his notebook out, but I'm not sure if it's about this one or the next one.
Oh, it's for the next one.
Okay,
Good.
yeah.
So yes.
Okay, so anyway, so they plant time bombs, sabotage the radio, hop in a lifeboat, and row away, and then the ship goes bluey and goes down.
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Also, what did they do with the lifeboat?
What did they do with the lifeboat?
Yeah.
They got to some...
And
got somewhere, and then they sank it.
Maybe
burned it.
Yeah, or maybe that was that wreckage that guy found on Gun Key 2 years later.
The Cyclo.
They'd taken some white paint, trying to paint over the name, but they didn't have enough.
Yeah,
they'd left the extra can on the ship.
Maybe.
Yeah.
No. What's next?
Our next one is actually a little more credible. This essentially is that a combination of things: bad weather, poorly loaded cargo, and just bad design caused the boat to roll over, take on water, and just sink suddenly. Yeah, and that was the U.S. Navy's official theory. Pretty recently after that, but although they have stressed that they don't really know. First of all, the Cyclops was overloaded. It's believed that the cargo was not well trimmed, and that there was...
Explain to people what you mean by well trimmed.
Oh,
yes,
yeah, well
please.
trimmed. Yeah, well trimmed. When a ship is out of trim, that means that... well, in this case...
It's tipping forward or back, left or right.
Exactly. The ship is not
setting centered.
Balanced. Yeah, exactly. Balanced. It's the same thing by trim.
Okay.
All these nautical terms, yeah.
One thing that people point to this is another thing that Worley gets a bad rap for, is he was known for being a jerk and locking up or confining to quarters the experienced man as retribution for some slight, and putting the guy who wasn't very good at the job in his place.
Yeah.
So you'll see people say his fault, but we don't know that for sure.
Yeah, I've heard it both ways. I have heard, like for example, the Wikipedia page on this particular thing claims that the guy who would have been in charge of supervising this, who was much more experienced in supervising the loading of the manganese coal, was confined to quarters, and a much less experienced crew member was actually supervising the loading. But then I heard from another very credible source that the Cyclops was loaded under the supervision of Captain Worley himself, and also a guy from the Brazilian coaling company named Manuel Pereira.
I guess I'll just bring up quickly that just because you're the captain of a ship doesn't mean you know how it should be loaded.
No, true. Although
right? I mean, I don't know that necessarily the pilot of a plane could look at a cargo hold and be like, yeah, that's right.
Well, one thing I will point out about Worley is he had been doing this job long enough that, like we talked about before, there was the failed mutiny and all of those things that happened, and he had been brought under scrutiny, but he never got kicked out of his job for the very basic reason nobody else could fill his shoes. Nobody else knew how to pilot, or I shouldn't say pilot, but captain this particular brand of beast.
But just because you know how to drive the thing doesn't mean you know how to load it.
That's true.
I'm
not going to disagree with that.
I'm not going to say either way because I've never had to load a cargo ship.
But
I can barely load stuff in my car.
But it's that same thing, right? It's like I don't know if just because you can captain a thing, if it means you know what it would look like when it's loaded right. So if he did oversee the loading of it, doesn't necessarily mean it was loaded right.
Yeah, no, not necessarily, no. But, and again, most of his experience and this guy named Manuel Pereira, of the Brazilian coaling company, those guys were used to dealing with coal and not with manganese.
Which is a completely different critter.
Yeah,
Totally.
manganese is twice as dense as coal, and which means that normally if you fill up the hole of the Cyclops, the hold, you're filling it all up. You're filling it all the way up with coal.
Right.
And so cargo shifting is not a problem. But since you're only filling it up about halfway, or a bit, maybe 2/3 at the most, then the cargo has room to move around.
This may be a silly question, but coal, I assume, is like bricks of coal.
Well,
right?
it's like rocks, kind of
Chunks,
Right.
yeah.
But manganese, how's that transported? Also chunks.
Yeah, chunks. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, chunks
Sure.
of ore.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's not going to fill the entire space.
Right.
So it's going to have the
just-
ability to shift.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, and I should also mention something else. The ship was top heavy because of the superstructure, all that whole framework and the cranes and everything like that. That's a lot of weight, really high up in the air.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and
So in rough seas,
that
like you might expect in the Bahamas,
yeah,
Tip.
Bermuda Triangle.
I always this makes me if you try to understand what the problem is have you ever seen the drinking bird, that silly little
Yeah.
thing that people have on their desk, which is
Yeah.
water on the bottom and then a tall long tube and then a weight on the
Yeah.
top that's
but
the head?
nobody has those on their desks anymore, but yes.
Okay,
yeah, that was a thing 20, 30, 40 years
40.
ago.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
one. Shut up. The
Okay.
point is that the way this ship is with that weight only filling part of its hold is exactly like the drinking bird. If you tap the bottom, it's going to very easily roll because there's a ton of weight up high and a ton of weight up down low, but nothing in the middle to stabilize.
Yeah, and it's just nobody knows exactly how well they did loaded the
Yeah.
thing. And I've got a quote here. I was gonna this guy named Alfred P. Reck, R-E-C-K.
Tell me,
Wrote about the wreck.
Does he write about undersea
Shipwrecks?
wrecks?
Yeah, well, he wrote about this
God,
wreck.
of course.
Yeah, he wrote this long article in the June 1929 issue of Popular Science called "Strangest American Sea Mystery Is Solved at Last."
Longest article title ever in
Yeah.
Popular Science.
Not even
Yeah,
at all.
no. So he actually got access to Navy documents from the investigation, and he quotes from one report, quote, 10,835 tons of manganese stowed direct on wood dunnage and bottom of hold. Reports differ as to whether cargo was trimmed level or left somewhat higher in the middle. Inclined to latter belief. Vessel also had 4,000 tons of water, mostly in double bottom. So far as ascertained, no steps taken to prevent increasing of metacentric height, governing top heaviness, and this must have been considerably increased.
Yeah, that's not a
Unquote.
good way to load that.
Yeah, no. If that is a big question. He seems this investigator.
So basically, he's saying the weight was put at almost the water line, so
Yeah.
that it would make the center of the ship the pivot point. Is that what that says?
Well, I think what he's saying is that by piling it high in the center, because if you do just dump it in there and you don't spread it around, then and you've got it higher in the middle of the
Okay,
sides,
so it's a cone.
then
Almost.
that raises your center of gravity.
Got it.
Yeah, and I think increase also the possibility of cargo shifting, because if it
Well,
was
and it's unsecured, right? We're saying
Yeah.
basically in my image, right, they have this big old hold that's just like a
Big old
tub
cavity.
yeah with a
Right.
pile of ore in it.
with a pile of ore in it, and they're like, that's fine, whatever, this is cool. And, you know, if it were full and you would have your canvas over it or whatever, if it were coal,
Yeah.
right, it's not going to shift around really that
No.
much. You're fine, but if
Yeah.
it's only half full,
Yeah.
you say, whatever, we throw the canvas over it, you hit a wave, most of it goes flying one way or the other,
Yeah.
you're out of luck. Like, that's
You're
bad
out of trim.
news.
You're gonna roll.
It's really
Well-
bad news, especially if you're top heavy,
Yeah, and
because you're just going to keep going.
it
Yeah.
kind of depends too. I mean, there's such a thing as rogue waves.
Yeah, if you hit a rogue wave,
If
you're
the
done.
rogue wave hits your
Done.
broadside, and also again, the other thing we don't know is what kind of shape their functioning engine was in. I mean, it could have quit, and if you're in a storm in heavy seas and suddenly you've got no power, you're really screwed.
Even if you only
Big
have
time.
half power, even if you only have power on one side,
Yeah, that's true.
You know?
It'd be hard.
and a rogue wave hits you on the other side, and all your cargo goes, whoops.
Well, so
Uh-huh.
let's talk about the storms, because I've heard conjecture that there was and was not storms
Yeah.
during their time. So what is
Yeah.
the official prognosis? Was there storms?
Yeah, there was
along
a
their
storm.
route?
There was most definitely a storm. I think that one of the guys that has put out this idea that it was all calm and sunny and nice is this guy whose name eludes me, and besides which I don't want to give him publicity anyway.
Okay.
But he was promoting the whole Bermuda Triangle, scary stuff.
Okay, I'm fine with ignoring that then.
Yeah,
Okay.
so he's all like, it was calm and sunny, but no, it's well documented. Storm warnings went out late on March 9th, 1918. March 10th, the winds got up to like 60 miles an hour. Swells were huge. This is reported again by that molasses tanker that we were talking about, the Amolco. They passed through the same storm, and the captain himself said that he was certain that storm sank the Cyclops. His boat, or I shouldn't say his boat, his ship, the Amolco, suffered $150,000 in damage from the storm. And again, this is 1918, so that's real money.
Yeah.
I know it's chump change today, but
That's real money.
yeah, it's real money back in those days. Yeah, so there was a storm.
Let's talk about the storm angle here for a second. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about with the storm is for ships that are this big and larger, I started doing some research on cargo container ships. And I've heard about this, but for the life of me, I couldn't find the name of the ship or the suit that was involved with it. But the common perception and understanding of how to deal in a large ship in a big storm is to stay in the trough. You don't want to be, running up and down the peak of waves. You want to try and stay in the troughs as much as possible.
It's kind of hard to do that sometimes.
It is hard to do that, but there's, to a degree, it prevents, a cargo container ships that are super crazy tall, and they don't want to roll around. And so there's ways to go about that. And there was this common perception of the best way to do it. And this was, I think, 5 or 10 years ago. A ship went down, and the insurance company was like, no, we're not paying out your claim. Your guys obviously didn't do what they were supposed to. So they got some very smart people involved who started figuring it out. And what they determined actually happened is if the winds are at the right speed and the waves are at actually the right duration apart, the common way to approach of trying to stay in the trough doesn't work. Instead, it creates this frequency of roll, which very quickly escalates and will roll a ship over. So it's a thing that, everybody on board is not aware of. It just a little bit, and then it just builds and accelerates and will roll a ship.
I've heard about this phenomenon, yeah.
And so
I know what you're
that's why
talking about,
I wonder with a ship that's as top heavy as the Cyclops, in a sea where they're like, oh, well, no, but we definitely don't want to be rolling over the top of that big wave and back down the next one. Let's try and stay in between them. They could have got themselves into a scenario where that frequency would have happened and would have rolled the whole thing, which would explain everything's okay, we're on, we're side, and we're under.
From my time on a cruise ship.
You gotta play the cruise ship card again.
Yeah, in my nautical experience, yeah. No, one of the things they train you about is like, if you're in rough seas, if you start taking on water, you're SOL. An inch of water is what they always told us, and this could be totally wrong, but all it takes is an inch of water on your middle deck, and as soon as that starts hitting your way, it's going to increase it so much. So they always said to us, the most effective way to survive a storm is to drive around it.
Yes.
Yeah,
if there's
run away
a
from
storm, you run away as fast as you can.
Oh yeah, no, I'm a coward. I would run away every time.
Absolutely do. But you just go, you try to hit as far as the edge as you can, and then you just kind of just try to ride it out.
But if you can't...
Right, but the other thing that I will say is that from where they were going, especially since they were in the Bahamas, right? It was documented they were...
No, they were in Barbados.
Barbados.
Yeah.
It's not like wildly open seas out there.
No.
It's one thing if you're doing an Atlantic crossing and you're like, okay, we're screwed.
Yeah.
There's this huge storm. We're going to ride the trough and just hope for the best. But it's another to be going up the Atlantic coast. Like,
well, they weren't really.
They weren't going up the coast.
Actually, Barbados is actually.
They just go straight up.
Is almost directly south of Baltimore. It's almost. I mean, it's not exactly, but it's almost.
But you don't necessarily. I mean, there are shipping lines. Like, you don't. You're not just like, I don't know. There's a straight line here, so we're gonna take that. You ride the currents.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
And I don't know what it was.
I don't know what their course was exactly.
I would guess it's not. Let's go all the way out to the open sea and then back.
They would have been pretty much out in the open sea, but they could have gone straight as an arrow. They probably sort of veered towards the coast and whatnot, but they weren't like hugging the coast.
No. I don't mean like right up on it, but you're also not like 70, 80, 90, 100 miles out in the middle of the ocean where you can't go around things. You can't just drop anchor and try to ride it out. Or whatever you do, but it's one of those things where it's just like once you're out there and you're done.
Yeah, they could have very easily run around a storm, but then again, they may not have had the power to run around a storm.
True too.
Yeah,
on a single engine, they may have looked at it and said, "Oh hell."
Yeah, but as I'm saying, if an inch of water will make a difference, imagine what a half full hull of really dense material will do for you. Done, and the waves don't even have to be that big.
Yeah, no,
they really don't.
Yeah, it's been said that if you get water into the hold,
you're done.
And you get water in the hold, then apparently it makes the manganese much more slippery, and it becomes a slurry, and it'll just slide back and forth.
Just turns into gel, basically.
Yeah. Well, not quite that, but still,
essentially,
it'll be a lot more mobile than it would be if it was dry.
Yeah.
Okay, so the cargo shift, rogue wave, top heavy, all that stuff. That's that theory. Any more thoughts, you guys? Or
no.
No,
I mean, this is actually a viable theory. It's one of the more viable theories that I've seen.
The rogue wave / cargo shift?
Yeah.
Well, and by the way, we didn't say what a rogue wave is.
Yeah, rogue wave is it's like this wave that's kind of had a bad upbringing. They're
on the wrong side of the track.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, rogue's waves are just out of the blue, abnormally
absurdly
large.
High. Yeah, and they happen.
They do.
They do. Yeah, I mean,
but, if you're not expecting it and it suddenly washes over the deck of your ship, it's gonna cause a lot of problems.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and they do happen, and so especially in things like storms, you can have big waves. You got to have a few that are extra big waves. All right, but so much for that theory. I think it's a very strong possibility. And but let's look at our last theory, which says that it was a design flaw in the ship itself,
which has some good legs to stand on.
Kind of does, yeah. There was, as I said earlier, the ships in the class. There were 4 of them. They all met a bad end. One of them, the Jupiter, was converted to an aircraft carrier and became the Langley. It was the first aircraft carrier built by the U.S. Navy. It was damaged by a Japanese attack in World War II in 1942 in the Pacific, and it was scuttled by the crew. And so there's no mystery there. But the other 2, Proteus and Nereus, left St. Thomas Virgin Islands in November and December 1941, respectively. They were both headed to Canada with loads of bauxite ore, and both of them vanished without a trace.
Also,
with just exactly like the Cyclops, they just vanished.
But they're somehow not mysteries.
Yeah, I've seen a pattern there. For some reason the Cyclops is the big mystery, but
interesting. Is it because they had? Is it like a racist thing? Like it's because they had a German captain, the Cyclops?
That could be part of it. Mm-hmm. Now, bauxite is used to make aluminum, and it's not nearly as volatile under wet conditions as manganese. Is that correct?
I have no idea, to be honest with you.
Okay, I remember reading about bauxite just because it was weird, and it related to last week's episode with Bob Marley because it's something that comes from Jamaica, but I didn't remember if there was the slurry effect with it.
This I'm not really sure about. Okay. Yeah, but it has been suggested that maybe the cargo shift isn't the deal, and maybe what it was is they all suffered catastrophic structural failure due to corrosion from coal dust.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right, okay.
So it's kind of bad and nasty and toxic.
Yeah.
So you said you found a quote?
Yeah. I found a quote from a study called Corrosion of Mild Steel by Coal and Iron Ore, which is this quote: a pronounced increase in corrosion rate was observed at a moisture content between 60% and 80% of the maximum water holding capacity for all samples. The corrosion rate was also observed to increase with decreasing particle size distribution, meaning that the finer the dust, the nastier the corrosion. And you're going to find a lot of moisture and a lot of coal dust on the Cyclops and also on the Proteus and Nereus.
Well, they were all called floating rust buckets.
Yeah, and they weren't that old. I mean,
No.
Yeah.
they weren't that. But yeah, a crewman that was on the Cyclops who got off of it before they sank.
Lucky man.
Yeah, I said it was in terrible shape.
Well, I would also explain maybe why an engine.
Yeah.
Not, at that point, if something had corroded there.
Yeah, and there have been other instances of not just ships in this class, but of freighters snapping in two. And these three boats ships were very long, and
Now, how did they?
And the hold was in the middle.
yeah,
Well,
too.
and how did they seal the hold?
with canvas. They had canvas covers. So, obviously water got in there and mixed in with the coal dust and rusted the hell out of everything.
Every
Yeah.
time it rained.
Yeah, and so between it being structurally compromised and going through really heavy seas in a storm, it's not hard to imagine that
No,
it just
not at
snapped
all.
in two.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and bam.
Which isn't something you really want to think about if
Yeah.
you've ever really been on any kind of ship.
Yeah.
Any
In rough
kind of
seas?
vehicle. I don't want to think about corrosion and snapping.
I don't either.
Yeah,
That's
good
why we
point.
don't do that with coal anymore, right? We don't power our cars with coal anymore.
Well, and
Yeah.
it turned out that yes, Devin, that is exactly
Thank
why.
you.
Okay, cool. Good reason. Yeah. By the way, cruise ships these days, they're not coal powered, I know.
No, I told you they're electric. We plug them in.
But they have a ridiculously shallow drafts, and I know they do this so they can get into harbors and stuff like that. But I mean,
Some of them do, not all of them.
yeah. I'm
Oh,
just,
well, and there are stabilizers and there's lots of technology.
oh, really? Because I was just wondering about that.
But no, I mean, the bigger the ship, obviously the deeper
Yeah.
The draft.
the draft, and the ones that make the cross Atlantic journey are way. But most ships don't do that. Most of the cruise ships these days, they just kind of hug the coast and stop a lot of places. Even the ones that it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay.
I know our listeners like to listen to me talk about cruise ships sometimes, but I'm not going to go too far.
No, it's not that
Yeah.
interesting.
No,
Now,
I agree.
actually,
But
one of these-
they seem to like it. So
One of these days, we're going to have one of those cruise ship junkets where you can take a cruise with the cast of Thinking Sideways podcast for
except
like a
for
beer.
it'll be just Joe and Steve because Devin is not going back on a cruise ship.
Yeah.
Not going back in there, man.
All right, we're gonna hire an actress to play Devin.
Yeah, as long as it's Scarlett Johansson, I'm okay with it.
I'm all out of theories, unfortunately. I know you'd like to go on with this forever. Do you guys have any more
but
thoughts
this
on
actually,
this
this
theory
actually
about
makes a lot
breaking
of
into?
sense.
Oh yeah.
I mean, because if you think about it, okay, so we've got a compromised structure because of the coal dust, and it's eroding everything. And if you're in heavy seas and the waves are far enough apart,
Yeah.
and they're rising, so the bow and the stern are being lifted, but the middle of the ship is no longer supported by as much water, that weight is going to make it snap.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if suddenly the internal
not-
structure is weakened, yeah,
It's not gonna, but it probably
it's
did.
much more likely.
And again, given that the two sister ships both disappeared equally as suddenly,
Yeah.
that-
I don't
that
know,
kinda
I
Which
guess-
would
gives you
explain
an-
why
yeah.
nobody could radio.
I don't know. Does it though? Like, I mean, we were just talking about like the Titanic, right? It suffered a very catastrophic event, and still took hours for that thing to sink.
Once it snapped, though, it didn't take hours.
Yeah, if it snapped in two, it went down really fast. And here's the deal.
How fast though? Like,
Yeah, that's the
like
thing
a
is-
couple minutes, a couple.
Well,
right?
it's not as
Yeah.
if it would
Couple
just
seconds?
snap, and it's not a cartoon. It's not where it goes whoop, bloop, and goes
Right.
straight down. It's going to roll over on itself, and the bridge is going to go underwater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's
And
true.
therefore, no radio
Yeah.
contact.
Although if
Well,
you're hitting
yeah.
seas that rough, maybe